Welcome to the Hopenning, the place where hope is happening, with your hosts Fran Cadron and Marina Theron-Monnery. For more information about Fran and Marina, or to apply to be a guest on the show, please go to our website www.hopenning.com. The Hopenning is for informal purposes only and is based on the research of your hosts, Fran and Marina. They, as well as their guests, are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from this podcast, which is not intended to replace any professional medical advice or care by medical professionals you are currently utilizing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hopenning. This is a place where hope is happening. My lovely co-host Marina and I are here to make hope happen for you. And our special guest today on episode number 111, which is a very lucky number, is Grant Snider. Yay! Applause, please. Grant comes to us from Wichita, Kansas, USA. He began drawing and writing before he knew what he was doing. Soon it was too late to stop. His work has appeared in the New York Times, Book Review, and all across the internet. As author and illustrator, he's created a dozen published books, including the Goodreads Choice Awards finalist, I Will Judge You by Your Bookshelf. His most recent book is Poetry Comics. He lives in Wichita with his wife, 4 sons, a daughter, and he's an orthodontist. Incredible. And so you will find him carrying a sketchbook, lost in his thoughts. Thank you, Grant, for being here with us today.
Thanks, Fran and Marina. I'm excited to talk to you both.
Yes.
That's great. My first question for you is, where do you find time?
Well, so my bio shifted a little bit in the fact that I used to be more of a full-time orthodontist. Now I'm only a part-time orthodontist. So I work from home, or usually actually away from home in the library or some quiet space, because home's loud with 5 children, for 3 days a week. And that gives me plenty of time in my own head, almost too much time, to be honest. So back when I was in school and, starting in my career, I found the early morning hours really productive, and I still do find those to be super productive, but now only when they're necessary, like when I'm chasing a deadline or, have this burning idea I have to get to right away. Mostly I use those for sleeping in when I can. And the early hours are good for going on a run this time of year where it's too hot to do it any other time of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you've been doing the comics for 15 years. And I read in your, you've got an amazing newsletter. So I read in your newsletter today that it started when you were a kid, doodling, just to spend some time doodling because you were an introvert. So I know what it's like to be an introvert. I came from a huge family, and I had a half dozen brothers, so that I didn't have to talk ever or stick up for myself. So you're a twin. So what was it like for you growing up as an introvert and being in your head, like you say, and being you were an illustrator even from the time you were young? But tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I sometimes say that being a twin is like having a superpower. In the case, since I don't sign my brother's name on my drawings, it's a secret superpower now, although I do try to mention him in interviews and occasionally, because yeah, he still is a big force in my work as far as editing or helping choose, what to publish or what not to publish, and just kind of being a good first reader. But going back to childhood, we were both very creative, very into drawing, writing, telling stories, like I think most kids were and are. But we also had each other to kind of compete with and bounce ideas back and forth with. So whereas if I was, working alone, I might start a project and then abandon it for something else. With my brother Gavin, we could go back and forth and exchange ideas, add to each other's drawings, add to each other's stories or poems, and come up with something maybe greater than we could have done alone. The other part of it too was, on the introverted side of things, Gavin has always been a bit more outgoing. So if you were to like meet us both for dinner, you'd probably find that he does quite a bit more of the talking, and that's just kind of a natural role I slid into. But as twins, working in our own creative space, we could both kind of be in that same world inside both of our heads. I don't know how to explain it really. I mean, you hear those stories of like really young twins having a secret language. It's kind of like that. I mean, it wasn't, we didn't make up our own words or language or anything, but it was definitely a unique form of communicating that I think both helped grow us into, very creative adults. Now Gavin also has a dual career thing going. He works as an architect by day, and by the other hours of the day, he illustrates and does commissions of, usually architectural paintings, but also sketches of people or landscapes or cityscapes. So he's definitely taken his creative career to new heights as well, in a much different path than I have.
That's amazing. And I think it's that, I think intuition that you have for each other when you are a twin, that is something that the rest of us don't really understand. And
Yeah, I
there
mean,
are so many amazing studies about that.
I think siblings, like close siblings, share it for sure. So you talk about having a bunch of loud brothers, friend. I know there's, probably inter sibling dynamics where you can have, kind of a similar relationship. But as with the twin, you're kind of almost it's forced upon you, because
Yeah.
you share a womb, you share usually a room, sometimes a crib, even like you're always sharing space. So that physical space you share ends up being kind of a mental space as well, which I think is good and bad in a lot of ways. But I think for me, mostly it was good.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, I can see that happening because, I was never a twin and we didn't have twins in our family. But my sister, who was 11 months older than me, was my mouthpiece.
Yeah.
And since she was older, she spoke for me as well. So, I mean, I didn't have to until
It's
I
nice.
had to.
It's
Yeah.
nice to have that backup. Yeah. And although, yeah, I'm sure as you experienced, like when I was thrust out in the adult world on my own, there was some learning to do.
Yeah,
Still is.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you started doing the poetry comics when you were in college. Am I right?
Yeah. So my first, I guess, foray into cartooning was for the student newspaper in my undergraduate studies. So I was a chemical engineering major for some reason, which I enjoyed. I think I did fairly well at it, but I always had this, this small burning flame of, hey, I really want to have an artistic outlet. Not necessarily as a career or a job, but maybe as, just something I did on the weekends or in my spare time. But I never knew quite what that was. I tried landscape painting and I was, decent at it, but just didn't quite find the spark. I tried some other forms of art, but really landed on cartooning because I saw the student newspaper had nobody drawing, cartoons for it in their opinion section. I was like, well, I could do that. And without really knowing what I was doing, I got into drawing a daily comic, or I'm sorry, a daily single panel cartoon. And I was kind of hooked. If you go back and look at that work, which hopefully some still exists somewhere, hopefully some doesn't. I think when I look back at it, I would find that maybe every ninth or 10th thing I did had some inspiration and insight to it. The rest was kind of filler, or let's say junk. But it was a huge learning process. So I developed the ability to churn out ideas pretty fast, to find out what I was interested in, to kind of edit things into what I thought was funny or interesting. And when I left college, I kept doing it. I would send my work into local newspapers. I started putting it online, and I got into some newspapers in the Kansas City area where I was living for dental school. But soon I figured out, okay, a bunch more people are reading this on the internet than could ever read it in a small, regional or local newspaper. So before I knew it, I was posting a weekly comic, and thousands of people from here to India to China to Brazil to all the way around the world were reading incidental comics, and that just blew me away. I never anticipated anything like that when I started drawing for my small campus newspaper.
The storyline behind the poetry, the comics right now, what is the inspiration behind that? What is the message?
Yeah, so I joke that I think I started doing those because I stopped being funny. So, I mean, some do have a sense of humor to them, but Early on in my strips, I was always trying to make a joke or be ironic, and at some point that lost some of the joy for me, or maybe I just found other avenues of expression. So I started noticing the connections between the comic strip form and the poetry form. I started reading a lot more poetry in addition to illustrated work, picture books, comics, graphic novels. And I really got hooked on the idea of trying to combine the poetic aspects of the comic strip, and borrow some of the language, some of the repetition, some of the imagery from some of my favorite poets like Mary Oliver, like Robert Frost, like Langston Hughes, and put them onto the page in like a comic or a graphic form. I don't know that I've succeeded at it yet. I think I've got a good start, but it's really an interesting project. I hope to continue on for a long time.
Grant, as you speak, I think about your comics, and I retired from elementary school teaching just a year ago, right? And I used Calvin and Hobbes as as a way to help kids with dialogue when they're writing stories, right? To help them with dialogue. And I think about your comics, and they're brilliant, really brilliant. The way you use vocabulary, the way you introduce vocabulary, like I just love it. And so now I teach pre-teachers in a university course, and I am going to introduce them to you and how you can use, excuse me, your comics to help kids learn to write, not only the poetry, but the depth. You can say so much in so few words with an interesting, really just, it's not a complicated picture, although you do have some complicated pictures, but your little picture in that little comic says so much in so few words. It's brilliant. Like, I love it. So my next question is, how did you ever come to illustrate Susan Cain's book, The Quiet Power? Like, how
Oh
did
yeah,
that all
okay.
come about?
Yeah, so but first I want to talk about Bill Watterson a little bit, because I think we share that mutual love, as probably anyone who read newspapers in the 90s did, newspaper comics. But that was one of the strips I read as a kid, and as a grown up, that really just like kept me going. So I think like you said about the dialogue of Bill Watterson, it's thoughtful, it's hilarious, it's kind of like, there's this great like camaraderie between the characters, Calvin and Hobbes, but also Calvin and his parents. As a dad, I really see a lot of that, annoyance from the father, and boisterousness from the child, you might say. Anyway, but yeah, Bill Watterson is a huge influence. So even just being, hearing that mentioned as a connection is great. So, and I think I forgot your question. Oh yeah, Susan Cain. I'm sorry. um, I drew a comic strip about introversion called "We Are the Introverts," because I think something was in the water around the time Susan Cain's best-selling book Quiet came out. Introverts like us were looking out and saying, okay, there's some positive aspects of our personality that maybe we viewed as negative for too long. Labeling it as shyness or social phobia, or however you want to frame your introversion, depending on the level of it. Not always helpful to have a negative connotation. So somebody involved with the book, maybe it was Susan or one of her co-authors, I think, read that "We Are the Introverts" comic I drew, and recommended me as somebody who'd be a good fit for drawing the comic illustrations and cover for her book. And I was thrilled to do it. I loved the manuscript. I was also pretty intimidated because I'd never done any project like that. But it gave me a good insight into how the world of making books and illustrations works, but also how to, more properly view my own introversion. Not to look at it as something to be ashamed of or annoyed at, or something to battle, but looking at it as a positive thing. And I really think that's what Susan Cain's book Quiet, and her book for teenagers Quiet Power, has done for thousands and thousands of people, which I'm really happy it's done that.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. So there's quite a theme on being an introvert. I'm an extrovert, so it's kind of
It's
a
okay.
weird concept for me. But I'm married to a chemical engineer, incidentally, and he's the introvert. And
That's good.
I have to draw him out of his shell. So there's a lot of that I understand, and I think as an artist myself, I'm a musician, but that real need to express. And how did that help you to express yourself through drawing?
Well, I think introvert or extrovert, drawing and writing give you a lot of freedom of expression, because instead of having to be on stage, bearing your soul like a musician or an actor might do, where you're physically present with the with the audience, you're a little bit hidden behind the wall of the screen or the page or the book or whatever medium you're transmitting your message in. So I think no matter your level of introversion, extroversion, ambiversion, having the page is like the way you're transmitting your ideas, or the computer screen, like I said, just gives you a lot of freedom. You can say things, and because maybe a character is speaking them, or maybe your like drawn avatar is saying them, you can be a lot more outspoken or thoughtful or sensitive, or whatever. Take whatever characteristic you want and amplify it, because you have a little bit of distance between yourself and the person receiving it. So I do find it hard to go out, and the other part of being an author, to go on stage in front of maybe classrooms or whole schools full of kids and stand on a podium and read your work and get really animated. That's still a big challenge for me, and I feel exhausted after even an hour of doing that. But I know that that's okay. I mean, I'll be able to retreat back to my writing space, my drawing space. I'll be able to express those thoughts in maybe a more organic way, between me and the page. And there's nothing wrong with an introverted author going on stage and feeling a little shy. Sometimes it comes through as more passionate performance than if they felt super confident up there. So yeah, I'm happy for that challenge and that part of my job as a cartoonist and a children's author as well.
Mm-hmm. So you've got 12 books that you've already gotten published. But the title of the one that was most appealing to me was "I Will Judge You by Your Bookshelf." So, when I told my daughter about that we were going to interview you, and this is the title of your book, we laughed our heads off because it is so true. Because I purposefully don't have books behind me, but my bookshelf is in my living room. And you can kind of tell, you can judge me by my bookshelf. Mine is like Roy G. Biv. It's right. It's like red, yellow, orange, blue, yellow. That's the way my books are categorized, and I like it. And some people might have a hard time finding a title that they're looking for, and they don't make sense at all. But I like it, Roy G. Biv.
Yeah, I
So
think the only so I'm very open to all forms of bookshelf organization. I miss my old room where I used to do Zoom calls, because I had a great, super messy, disorganized, unreadable bookshelf behind me. But I think in all my work for that book, I realized the only form of book shelving that I'm really against is the people who put the spine of the book facing in, so they have just a wall of the white pages facing out. And I think maybe this was circulated on a joke, on the internet some years ago, and that's where I saw it. But you can do anything with your bookshelf you want is acceptable, except putting the spine facing in and the pages facing out. That's beyond the pale. I'm
I
curious
hate to
to hear,
say
though,
it,
about
but mine is by size. Mine is from the shortest to the tallest.
Well, see, I mean, these are all valid organization. Mine is randomly shoved in every corner, and then we have a bunch of library books, and we'll have the kids reshelve them at night because they've read them and scattered them about the floor. And what they think reshelve the books means just stuff them in every cranny you can. So books are on top of books, and you couldn't even get to one without like making a landslide of all the others. And it's really completely, disorganized and messy. So I think anyone with any form of organization, that's great. I do think it sometimes reveals more about your personality than you want, anyone but close friends and family to know. But I'm very ecumenical when it comes to bookshelf organization tactics.
So, Grant, in researching a book like that, what did you learn? What was your biggest takeaway from that?
My biggest takeaway was that I have a few friends who have read far and wide beyond what I could ever imagine reading in my lifetime. So that comic and the title especially was inspired by, being over at a friend's house and looking at there's 7 copies of, some obscure, actually, no, it wasn't obscure. It was I think it was Dante's Divine Comedy, which
Oh, right.
I'm sure they
Yes.
took a college class on it, but had then gone on to like find every possible edition and translation and claimed to have read all of these. Another
Wow.
friend, I didn't actually go into his house to witness this, but he claims to read Tolstoy's War and Peace every year, and he has like strong opinions on like which translation is the best. I was happy we did it for book club a couple years ago. I was happy just to get through it once, and then I watched the musical about it, so I felt like I was still participating in that. But I think any reader, like I consider myself a pretty devoted reader, but it's like they say like rich people are always worried because there's somebody richer than them. I'm like that, but with books. I feel like very I don't know, like wealthy in my amount of reading I do, but there's always somebody who's one step or like maybe 10 steps above me. So but I find some humor in that.
Oh, definitely.
I do know when I'm among my friends, I'm definitely the best read when it comes to books written for people 12 and under. So I can make that claim at least.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
bet. You've got 5 children, right?
Yes.
5 children. And so what are their ages? I know the little one is a 3-year-old.
Yeah. So my youngest is 3, and he's surprisingly asleep and not throwing a tantrum right now. And then I have my oldest, my daughter is 11, so she'll be in 6th grade, starting middle school, and then kind of spaced out, a couple years apart in between them. 4 boys and a girl is an interesting mix. There's a lot of wrestling and fist fighting and other kinds of things you might imagine thrown books, but there's also a lot of joy. I think they're getting a pretty interesting childhood and always have companionship whether they want to or not.
Are any of your kids twins?
No twins, no,
No.
but
Interesting.
it's funny if you put them in a lineup just based on the way their heights are. The 3 boys in the middle, my 5-year-old, my 10-year-old, and my 8-year-old, they all look about the same height and weight. So they're definitely
Interesting.
mistaken for twins or sometimes triplets
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the oldest, the 10-year-old is not small, but on the average or shorter size, and then the 10-year-old is tall. I'm sorry, the 8-year-old is tall, and the 5-year-old may grow up to be like 6'8" someday. So we buy a lot of groceries. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Oh, well, I can relate. My youngest son is 6'6", so I can
Okay,
relate.
yeah.
Oh my
I
goodness.
need some advice on how to handle that
Oh,
when
yeah,
this young
just keep
one
on
hits
feeding them.
high school.
Yeah.
Yeah, the amount of food they go through. I'm
Uh-huh.
curious what your grocery bill is because I don't know. Like I need to start writing some more books after I see, the amount of food these kids are eating.
Yeah.
It's insane.
And yeah,
So
6'6". That's interesting. It's
Mhm.
like being a twin, a blessing and a curse, I believe.
Yeah.
hard to fit in an airplane seat.
Uh-huh.
Oh, you have no idea. I'm so glad I'm not him. I'm tall, but
Yeah.
I always try to get a longer leg room or more leg room for myself. But man, I'm glad he's young. He can manage still. So
Right. It's when you're 40 and trying to fit into an airplane seat. I think it's interesting to go. I'm taking this on a detour, but architecture. There's a Frank Lloyd Wright house in Wichita, and if you go into Frank Lloyd Wright house or really any house designed 50 years ago or more, it's like the rooms are made for miniature people. And I
Mm,
think I don't know. We talked about Tornado Alley shifting. I have a feeling that maybe it's true. The population is kind of growing bigger and taller as well. So um, we'll have to adjust architecture accordingly. And feel free to
right,
edit that
for
out of
sure.
the interview.
No, it's very interesting because he actually started his degree in architecture, but he switched to urban design.
Uh-huh.
And so I think he would talk to you, and light fixtures in a lot of houses. Like I have
Right.
seen him bump his head so many times because
It's very
it's
much a
just
short person's world. Yeah.
the chandelier ones who are hanging.
Uh-huh.
It's crazy. And then my older son is 6'4", so 6'4" and 6'6", so they're both tall. They're both up there.
Right. Right.
Oh, crazy. So yeah, I sympathize on the grocery bill, definitely.
So you called your, I guess it's the company, Incidental Comics. So where did you come up with the name Incidental?
So I'll preface this by saying, so I had a band in college where I didn't really ever play an instrument except trombone and marching band, but my brother's Gavin, his band needed a bass player. So I thought I can stand and hold a bass and pretend to play while they do their show. And I did a pretty good job of pretending to play and not actually, making any notes. But the hardest part of being in the band was not writing the music or performing the shows. It was choosing a band name. So I think we went through like hundreds of names, all mostly bad, before they settled on one. And he's since changed the name a couple of times. But I felt the same way when I had to name my comic strip. So when it was in the newspaper, it was first called Delayed Karma, which was sort of a play on my mother's maiden name Delay and a John Lennon song called Instant Karma. But obviously nobody got those references, so it didn't make any sense. So when I came up with Incidental Comics, I was also playing off a couple of things that didn't really make sense together. I was in dental school, so I was like, oh, incidental has dental in it. Okay, that's something. There, there's there's a term in, I think, film called incidental music, which is like the music that plays and kind of draws the action along, but is more like background music. Any film or music composition person might have a better definition of this, but I think of it as just kind of like the ambient music and playing as the story is going about. And I kind of like that idea of the comic strip just kind of being this like low key quiet thing in the background of daily life. And then I played football in high school and some other sports, but I always remember watching football and hearing the term incidental contact, which is when a wide receiver is going to catch a pass and gets knocked over, but it's not pass interference, it's not a penalty. It was incidental contact. They just fell over because they were running and got their legs tangled or something. So those three random things, I guess, came to form the name. It's stuck. I can't change it. I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's there and has been for about 15 years now.
So
when
you've
I,
just,
oh, sorry.
sorry, Fran, go ahead.
When I think of the word incidental and I think of your comics, they are kind of a slice of time, an incident, right? Whether
Yeah.
somebody's rolling down the hill or climbing a tree or whatever it is you've drawn, it is kind of a slice of time, an incident. But
Exactly.
now that I hear the background of it, it makes more sense, right?
Well, I think when I started drawing them, I didn't quite know what the strip would be or what it would turn into. So yeah, I stumbled down the hill into that definition of incidental as well, which I'm happy to have done.
I can definitely see your sense of humor coming out, and that's great. What is your most recent book?
My most recent book is poetry comics, which is,
Right.
I consider it for all ages. I think if you look at the publishers' data on it, or the publishers saying it's for kind of like a late elementary, early middle school audience, maybe third through fifth grade. But when I make something, I really want it to kind of be for myself first, for my first readers, my wife and my brother second, also for my editor. They're a good first reader as well. And then I did want this one to appeal to kind of a younger audience, really where my kids are right now, because I want them to be able to read, respond to it, and be able to see the feelings and insights and thoughts that I'm putting into it as well. And I feel like some along the way, my work is kind of mirrored like the development of my family. So before I had kids, I was doing things for kind of what you might call like a college student type audience, or early young professional audience. When my daughter was born, I started writing picture books, which are kind of for that 3 to 5, 3 to 7 age range. And as my kids have grown, I've kind of transitioned from picture books to more like what they call middle grade. And as we speak, I'm trying to hammer through the first few drafts of a book that's written more for like a 7th through 8th, 9th grade audience, a little more mature, a little more serious, but hopefully with that same humor, insight, and universality as my other work as well.
Yeah, like I look at the names of the books that you have written, The Shape of Ideas, the sound, what sound is morning, what color is night, blue floats away. So what that target audience must have been quite small, right?
Yeah, so the children's picture book, the idea is, for the I mean, for the adult to read it to the kid, right? Whether it's a teacher, a grandparent, caregiver, mom or dad, sibling, usually to somebody who's not reading yet. And then, yeah, so writing those is a big challenge because you want it to be accessible enough that somebody without many, cultural or other references can get it, but also so that the parent's not bored reading it. So they're kind of like taking I feel like the simplest elements of my creative expression, combining them with the richest visuals of my creative expression, and trying to turn it into a 32 to 50 page story. Which, yeah, they're quite a bit more challenging than making a comic strip or even making a book of poetry comics. It's nice to feel like when you start a creative project, you don't have anything mastered yet. Feeling like a beginner in any part of life, I think is terrifying, but also kind of exhilarating. So whenever I sit down to make a picture book, I feel that exhilaration and terror of, okay, I'm a beginner. I'm doing this thing I don't quite know how to do. I have a little bit of insight into how to do it, but really don't feel like I've mastered it yet.
I love that you use the growth and the, I want to say, evolution of your children to motivate you to write. So that's a perfect prototype. How do they respond? Are they some of the first test subjects that you expose them this to?
They're brutally honest, yeah. So it's kind of like cooking a meal. You make something, your kids are going to really quick tell you whether they like it or not. And if they don't tell you with words, they'll tell you with pushing it away or just leaving it, sitting out unfinished. So my son Trent, he's the 10-year-old. He's kind of the one who I think is most similar in personality and affect to me, for better and worse. And he said something like, when I showed him my book before poetry comics, he said, "Dad, when are you going to draw something funny?"
Oh,
And I think luckily when I gave him poetry comics, he's like, yeah, a few of those I think were pretty funny. So I'm winning him over slowly but surely.
yeah.
Uh, but it's nice. I mean, it's nice to see them react to it and read it. And I know it's not their favorite books, but I think they'll appreciate it, growing up with it, and probably one day like nostalgically look back on it and be like, oh, that's interesting. I never realized my dad had this kind of unique job. I just kind of took it for granted when I was that age.
Mhm. And a 10-year-old is very honest, and usually tries to be kind, but it doesn't always come out that way,
Uh-huh.
right? But I think about the one comic that you drew where it must be your 3-year-old. You're reading the same book to the 3-year-old over and over and over and over and over. And I think about real life. It is true that 3-year-old, 4-year-old, they just want to hear the same story over and over and over. Like, so, I remember back being a teacher, it's like, yeah, buy as much, really good books as you can. And they're always going for the same one that you've read 100 times already.
Right. Which, as the person reading it, can be very frustrating. And I think I drew that so I yeah, the character was a 2 or 3 year old and that a toddler, but I drew that when it was for my firstborn, my daughter. So I think I found a little more humor in it back then. Now I'd just be like, okay, no, we're not. I'd put my foot down. But yeah, I was more accommodating as a parent then.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like so much of the creative process is that repetition. I mean, not just the reading of books to get ideas or to entertain children. It's the actual writing and creating of the work itself is that repetition. It's going back again and again, going over kind of the same ideas, retreading the same themes, trying to find new energy and life in them. So I do feel like in a way I've been writing the same comic strip for the last, like I said, decade and a half. I'm going back to themes of like walking around in nature and feeling awe, or
Mhm.
being a little bit annoyed about certain things that my kids are doing, or going on a run or riding a bike and just kind of getting out of my head a little bit. Those things I keep coming back to. I keep retreading. I keep telling myself the same story over and over again, and trying to find the insight and the inspiration again and again.
Inspiring children. I saw in Facebook, I believe, when you published when Poetry Comics was released in March, you kind of had a call, and if you want to draw a comic strip of poetry of your own. So how do you find that? Do you find that some kids do respond to that and want to feel inspired by it and want to act on it?
Yeah, and that's why the poetry comics book has been so I'd say different and exciting in a way than compared to a few of my other books, because there's a natural prompt for the classroom, for like a summer camp exercise, for even like, an adult artist sitting at home looking at their computer screen and saying, okay, I want to draw something, how do I get started? So it was really fun. And like looking back after I made the book, um, thinking backwards and coming up with, okay, if I want to bring this into a classroom, if I want to bring this into like a workshop setting, how can I teach some of the basic elements of making a comic strip? Because I know not everyone does it for their day job. And how can I make it simple enough that, a classroom of fourth or fifth graders will get it, but also exciting enough that, say somebody my age reading it and responding to it will want to get their pen out and do it. So it's been cool over the last couple months of the school semester. I was able to go to 4 or 5 different area classrooms and share it with anywhere from like third graders to seventh and eighth graders, and I really saw some neat stuff. And on top of that, teachers or librarians have sent me what their classes have done, and really some of the things have blown me away, just some of the expression and taking this tiny little prompt and running with it and making a great comic strip out of it. It makes me want to keep drawing them for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, Fran, as you spoke about being a teacher, I mean, what I'm saying is just what teachers do day in and day out. So I'm not like, I'm not reinventing the wheel here, but this has been one of my first experiences teaching comics. Not, I've tutored other things in the past, usually math back in the day, but I've never had the joy of teaching art. And this has been a really exciting thing for me.
And it's a good age group because right from grade 3 up to grade 7, they're still keen. Like they are really keen. Once you get to high school, it kind of falls apart. The friend group, the friends are way more important than whatever the teacher's blabbing on about at the front. I mean, you can be a published author of 12 books and, very famous, and yet it's pretty hard to get that high school attention. So you're hitting the right age there. So with all the work that you've done, now you're creating on the board or wherever you do it is a book for higher, like grade. Did you guys say grade 7, 8?
Yeah, so the character is going through a really rocky seventh grade year and dealing with a lot of um, difficulties that have caused the character to like drop his interest in drawing and making art, which I think is an interesting topic, because so many people I've talked to are like, okay, there was some point in my life where I drew, I made stuff, and then I didn't, which I think is, some of it's kind of tragic, I guess. So I was using that as the jumping off point for the story. I'm still like really early in the process, but it's really, yeah, it's been a really fascinating thing to explore. Kind of like I mentioned with the picture books, standing on the precipice, not quite knowing where where you're going to jump or where you're going to land. But I hopefully, however many years, 2 years, 5 years, I don't know, it'll be a published book I can go talk to kids and talk to middle schoolers about, and share hear some of their stories as well.
Well, having grown-up children today, it was some of the toughest years for my kids and for us as a family, dragging them through that. So I think that's very well timed, very very well
Yeah,
done.
and I think maybe I'm like almost writing it as an antidote to like what's to come. I mean, you're mentioning those experiences because I have a very very vivid memories of the way I was as a teenager, and it was not very pleasant at times or most of the time. So um so yeah, I don't know if I know a lot of people have seen Inside Out too, and I just watched it with my family, and literally I was like crying throughout the movie because, man, that was just so real. It felt so emotionally resonant, and just um yeah, it really was just like a very real feeling that I don't often get from seeing a movie in the theater. So I realized after after watching that movie and rereading a draft of the story, I was like kind of trying to do a similar thing, without the Pixar special effects, I suppose.
Really, inside out too, like with Marina and my job, really looking deep at emotions and how necessary it is for the range of emotions. Like you need to have that range of emotions. And as soon as we start quelling any emotion, it's going to start popping up somewhere else,
Yeah.
right? So inside out too, a principal friend, a former principal, uh, and now she does a little bit of substitute teaching. We saw it together and she was crying, but I don't cry at movies, right? I'm like right into it and feeling the feelings without crying. And she's like next to me, like just her heart is breaking, right?
Um,
So I can totally understand where you're coming from. And that movie is super well done. Um, I'm glad that you mentioned it actually Inside Out too.
Oh,
So
thank you.
it's been it's been a a time that you've spent drawing, like right from the time you were a kid up until whatever age you are right now. Was there ever a time that you thought you would give it up or that you just like Maureen and I have talked before about kind of the dark night of the soul moments for both of us, where it's like we went through something. It's a depression for both of us, a divorce, and Marina had health issues. And was there ever a dark night of the soul where you something, I mean, something happened where you didn't feel like you could do this anymore or life or something, I think for really creatives, uh, it's a thing.
yeah, and I mean, my answer is not to be like super flippant because it kind of sounds like it, but just being like dental school. So, um, it was never there was never like some big like emotionally rocking thing that shook my creative like faith in myself. But I always had this lingering thing like, oh man, am I going to be so busy in going through all this school and taking all these exams that I'll just let it slide and lose it. And I was really, yeah, exactly like you're saying. I was terrified of that for I don't know, 5 years more. Because college itself is not easy. High school is not easy at times. And then I feel like every academic level you go, as you guys probably experience in your training, it ramps up. So in college, yeah, I was busy, but I still had time to, go to football games and go to parties and do whatever college students do. And oh yeah, I drew and it was fine. And I didn't really think much about it. But when I got to dental school, it was like, okay, I need to be laser focused because I have all these classes, I have all these other things going on. I'm now married. I have, adult obligations, and drawing is not really an adult obligation at this point. I was drawing on the weekends, basically, guzzling a whole pot of coffee and not wasting my Saturday, but really consuming it with art. And it wasn't a healthy relationship to art. It wasn't healthy for my relationships or my schoolwork as well. So I knew it was unsustainable, but somehow I hung on through that. I got on, to later in school where I had a lot more free time. The wave passed, and somehow along with that, it started becoming more of a profession. So I got a few jobs where I was like, okay, I'm getting some validation, from the outside world, from these people at newspapers or books or magazines saying, what you're doing has value. It's more valuable than just a weekend hobby or pastime. Maybe this is something you could pursue as like a lifelong goal. And luckily I took that and ran with it. There was never a moment when I was like, oh man, I can't do this anymore, or I'll have to give it up, or I have to put it away. But there were, quite a few years where I was really just stressing myself out with it to the point of worrying about whether I could do it long term. So yeah, like I said, um, dental school, if you're going to be an artist, maybe it's not the right path. It worked for me, but it was full of challenges along the way. So, and that's not to say like I mean there have been some things in my own life. We have challenges with some of our kids and their emotional behavioral issues, diagnoses, et cetera, that have been rough. We had a move that kind of separated me from my normal routine and friend group and stuff, and stuff like that's been you know put me in the mood where I don't really want to draw from time to time. But thankfully, so far, that's been just like an afternoon or a day or a week where I feel like just like kicking the whole thing to the side. It hasn't been a long-term thing. So, but I know, like you're saying, for a lot of creative people, even if it's their profession, if it's their hobby, you know, whatever part it plays in their life, there's going to be things that separate you from it that make you feel like you can't do it. And I think overcoming those and working through those is, yeah, super valuable and valid and important.
Amazing. So, Grant, we always ask towards the end of our show, what is your message of hope for our audience?
My message of hope is that your words, your drawings, the pictures in your imagination, they matter. They have meaning to you. They have meaning to the people in your life. They may have meaning to a bigger audience if you choose to seek that. And so basically just feel all the permission, all the freedom to draw those stories, to write those stories, to tell those stories in any form you want, whether it's poetry, comics, writing a novel, playing music, you know, making a painting. I hope everyone feels that creative freedom and just, you know, creative ability to let those passions, you know, be a big part, important part of their life. So yeah, thank you guys for having me, and I really appreciate the chance to talk with you, and hopefully your audience enjoyed it as well.
I'm sure they did. So how can our viewers and podcast listeners get a hold of you, like, or see your work? Like, how, like, it's incredible stuff. Like, I love it. So I'm sure most people will as well. How do we get a hold of you?
So on social media, you can follow me on Instagram at Grant Draws, on Facebook at Incidental Comics. I also post to my newsletter, incidentalcomics.substack.com, and you can find my books at bookstores or libraries. Grant Snider, and hopefully there's many more to share with you guys in the coming years.
And you forgot to mention that you will give a signed copy, right? In that bookstore. I forget what the name of the
Yeah,
bookstore.
so my local independent bookstore, Watermark Books, which is just a great place, online has signed copies, and if you send them a note or give them a call, I make personalized doodles when I get the chance. So I always try to push people there because they've been an amazing support of my work. They bring some great authors in to their store, and yeah, I just try to use that connection any way I can because they've just been such a valuable part of my career as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Grant. It was wonderful having you, learning from you, being inspired by you. So it reminds me of Wayne Dyer, who said, "Don't let the music die within you." And so you are a great example of that. You're not letting your drawings go without being expressed. So thank you for being here today, and thank you, Grant.
Thank you,
Thank you, Marina. Thank you,
Marina.
Brennan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And to all our viewers, if you like us, please subscribe, and we will be back next time with more hope on Hopenning. Take care.